right, welcome back, everybody. Give it just a few seconds as everyone is filing in here with us. All right, we will go ahead and get started. Again, you should know who I am, Lee Ferrier. I'm the governor of AAF District 7 and the board advisor for AAF Montgomery. We are excited to have Claudine and Tony here with us today to talk about changes in media trends. Of course, we can't do this without our sponsors, and Nielsen, obviously, is sponsoring the chat with Nielsen. A little air meet housekeeping. We have comments over to the right. You can choose comments and questions. If you have questions during the session, please put them in the questions section, and we will use those for the Q&A at the end. And of course, all recordings will be available after the conference. We will share those out with you. So I'll go ahead and introduce our two speakers today. With Claudine Sokol, the Vice President of Client Services, Demand Advertiser Agency Services, also for Nielsen. She's worked for over 23 years in the media industry with a wide range of experience working in media, including national, mobile, movies, digital, local television, and local audio, in providing market research and strategic insights to networks, advertisers, studios, CPG clients, political agencies, advertising agencies, and non-traditional media clients. Claudine has helped convert media markets across the Southwest to electronic measurement since the late 90s and is committed to helping her clients understand the ongoing changes in the media industry. She's excited about the future of media in today's ever-changing, fast-paced world. Claudine is a graduate of Yeshiva University in New York City, born and raised in Los Angeles, California, where she currently resides with her 4 children and Luna the dog. She also loves to cook and travel with her family. Welcome, Claudine. And then we also have Tony Hereau with us, the Vice President of Cross-Platform Insights with Nielsen. He leverages the full suite of Nielsen services to demonstrate the impact that audio has on media investment, marketing and execution, and sales outcomes. With over 20 years of experience in the buying and selling of media, he played a key role in launching the PPM service, championed the radio reach story via the Total Audience Report, and most recently developed a measurement service for the podcasting industry. Tony's role as an audio ambassador gives advertisers and agencies an independent resource for all things audio in an ever-changing media landscape. All right, so I will hand it off to you guys.
Thanks so much, Leah. We're so excited to be here and to be sponsored. We're so happy that we're even here virtually. You know, it was such a sad beginning of COVID that we had to postpone last year. So today, both Tony and I are going to talk about some updates about media measurement and consumption and what's going on. So got a pretty aggressive agenda. We're going to talk about some streaming and COVID insights, right? There's a lot of talk about streaming during COVID. We're working from home. We're Zooming school from home. And we really want to give you some top level information that we're sharing about what we've gathered from our numerous areas where we measure within the Nielsen company. We want to talk a little bit about the evolution of television measurement. This is not the Nielsen of the past, the land of, diaries and 4 times a year surveys. So we're really excited because with the electronic revolution that you see with streaming and other things, adaption, we can talk about those changes. We also want to talk about how consumers, the people that you're marketing to, the people who are buying your client products, how their changes in their content and devices and how we're trying to follow that. We'll talk a little bit about non-Nielsen households and how we're gathering measurement from them. And then Tony will share with you audio insights pre and post COVID. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Really quickly, we talk about the streaming landscape, right? That streaming has been all about the COVID. But let's talk a little bit about 2 very important things that we saw during 2 major categories that were key media indicators. One is news and one is sports. So when you're looking at this graph, which started right at the beginning, right when COVID started with March 15th, you can see the blue represents news and the purple, or the hot pink, I guess, on the bottom represents sports. So you can see how things really got affected depending on what occurred. And so we definitely saw like the loss of sports after the NBA, the March Madness suspension. where people were like, okay, we're not doing anything. And then you see that the viewership to linear sports viewing really changed with the summertime and sports, whether it was the NBA in a bubble or the MLB cutting back to their number of games, or with the NFL trying to control these things. We definitely started to see that pick up. Same thing with news, right? We had the height of when first lockdown, then we had kind of like a drop again as people started coming out in May, but then everything kind of changed with the George Floyd protests starting after Memorial Day. And then again, kind of picked up when Biden made his choice for VP, Kamala Harris. Then Trump got COVID. That was a big news story, and so on until Election Day and forward. But I think that's really important to understand when we look at linear television, what really moved it. And I think what you could see here is that people watch linear programming for specific reasons, right? We look at it for news, for sports, and because it's been there traditionally. What has changed is that 85% of American television households today are streaming capable. Okay, that is a number that has exponentially grown, and it was growing before COVID, but really exploded. Because if you think about years ago when you kind of needed the Geek Squad, and if you had to get anything beyond the cable or satellite box, it was really hard, right? To install a Netgear or a different things. But today it's so easy, whether it's a smart TV that you just have to plug and put in your network home code for Wi-Fi, or it's an internet connected device like an Apple TV, a Google Chromecast, a Roku, an Amazon Fire Stick. The fact of the matter is it's much easier. Now, amongst those 85% of American households, 30%, 29%, this was as a week ending 19, but on average, 30% of them are spending 1/4 of their time streaming. That's what's really different and has been accelerated during COVID, the amount of streaming. So let's talk about what's being streamed, right? So obviously the big five. Who are the big five? Amazon Prime Video, Disney Plus, Hulu, Netflix is the behemoth, YouTube, and then you have other. So if you think back to 2019, you can see here, Netflix definitely has the greatest share. And then you have YouTube. Disney Plus wasn't even launched yet when we started taking this. So what's in that other? Crackle, other standalone HBO alone, not HBO Max, but HBO to go, different things that you could have gotten on your own. But now you look at what happened in December, and those numbers, 117.7 and 132, those are streaming minutes in billions of minutes streamed. And again, obviously, no big surprise, during COVID, it expanded a lot. And you don't even have in here HBO Max pulled out. You had the launch of Peacock during this time, the launch of Discovery Plus. I mean, you also had the launch and then failure of QB. So the reality is there's so much out there, and there's a lot of fragmentation, but there's still so much being streamed. So now, beyond the big five, this was the most surprising thing, that when you get beyond the big five, when you look at that MVPD and VMPD, 36%. So an MVPD is a multi-channel video programming distributor. It's a fancy way of saying you're getting a lot of content through a set-top box. So think about your cable or satellite box where you're getting your local channels, you're getting your cable networks, and your premium channels. When you put the word virtual, you're getting that same content now, but now you're getting it through an app, okay? The virtual part of it, the virtual MVPD. So what we see now is that past the big five, the next biggest content or devices that being streamed is linear programming. So that means I'm not watching through an antenna or a cable box, but now I'm watching through an app. And I think that really speaks to it, because anything you can get linear today, over the air, traditionally growing up, whatever networks were out there you're growing up, you can now get digitally as well. And I think the fact that when you look at that 85% streaming capable, and now we know that past the big five, what's the biggest area that these homes are doing? They're streaming linear content. They're streaming local broadcast content. Okay? So what about the age or demographics of these streamers, right? So when you look at these bars, the first bar represents the US television universe estimates, right? 31% are 55 plus, the green represents 35 to 54, the hot pink is 18 to 34, and then the blue is 2 to 17. When you look at the makeup of linear TV audiences, it's older, right? With 60% being 55 plus. When you look at total streaming, so that's every time of streaming, that includes the big five, and it includes ad supported or free, and the MVPDs, it's a little bit younger, looking a little bit more like the US TV universe estimates. When we look at the big five, Prime Video slightly a little bit older. Disney, no big surprise here, it's younger. Then Hulu, Netflix, a little bit different, but then YouTube, which is younger. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, and I think it's funny that YouTube here is younger because if I have a 16-year-old son and for some reason he likes to watch other people playing video games on YouTube, which I always thought was interesting, but who knows? But the fact of the matter is age becomes an issue, right? And as we get more part in our audiences, this is going to become more of how these creators are going to consider content and how to engage based on the ages that they are attracting. I want to talk about the age because what you saw there also was this, older demos. And this has been amazing. It started before COVID, but it's definitely happened in COVID. We've seen tremendous adoption with older demos. So persons 55 plus, older demos are really engaged here. And we've seen them, they're starting to adopt because think about it, years ago you needed the Geek Squad to get everything. Today it's a plug and play. Right? I update an app and what we've seen is older people, in COVID, there wasn't no sports for a while there. There wasn't a lot of original broadcast content. So they're hearing about the Queen's Gambit. They're hearing about, Tiger King or The Crown. And we're seeing people going to find these things and older people are going just along with that. So the next battle, it's interesting when we look at by gender, who are these audiences, right? So America's pretty even, about 51% female, 49% male. But when we look across the board, we see that streamers over-index for female, except for YouTube. And again, I really think it's because of a lot of male skewing. And this, I think, again, is where the next fight will be. What will these providers of streaming content do to attract male audiences? Because male audiences traditionally have been more valuable. It's why you pay more for sports advertising, why you pay more for anything that can get males engaged and around. So I think this is really interesting. The other thing is that we announced at Nielsen back in December, what is the new prime time? Because with so many people working from home, Zooming school from home, one thing that was really interesting was that people were watching more broadcast linear during the day and streaming at night. And as you can see here, and again, this is a snapshot of 1 week, right? Week of January 11th, 2021. But here you could see that Netflix is by far much more in terms of primetime ratings by thousands than an NBC. This is national ratings or a Fox affiliate. But then you have YouTube. So I think this is really important because this is also like when is it linear broadcast, traditional newscast, are different things. And then when are we moving as a group to watching streaming as long as there's new streaming content out there. And those are the things. So I think it's really interesting when we compare side by side viewing by source, because this is really the first time we've seen streaming outrank traditional broadcast. But again, remember the broadcasters this year was very late with the new fall season and a lot of shows didn't really come back until the spring. So I think this might be just because of COVID, and we'll see post-pandemic when people are more into production. Just a little tidbit here. People really did go to the office virtually in 2020. The idea that Americans streamed a cumulative 108,000 years, not hours, not minutes, but years cumulatively, right? From everybody who watched in 2020 of The Office just speaks to, things that live in digital, and it's getting new audiences and the value there. So I think it's really interesting, and I just wanted to share that with you. Now let's talk about the evolution of television. So we've talked about streamers, the importance of all of these homes, 85% of American households being capable of receiving streaming and such. Nielsen has really had to evolve its measurement, both on a national and in local basis. So we don't do diaries anymore. We retired the diaries in 2018. We now offer in all of our media markets, we offer 12 months of monthly data. And in all of our markets, we offer some sort of overnight. So in our top 56 markets, we offer household overnights. And then in our RPD, former diary markets, we're offering after 3 days. But let me tell you a little bit about how our measurement is emerged. So in the top 25 markets, we have something called a local people meter where we do, 24/7 direct persons and household information. Then the next 31 markets, we do direct household information, and we use artificial intelligence, AI methodology to figure out, hey, someone turned on Paw Patrol. We know there's a 7-year-old in the house, but we are going to use a modeling to make sure to attribute that viewing there. And then in 15 markets, we introduced something called the code reader markets, where we have a plug and play, looks a little bit like a stand-up Apple TV. Same thing with Set Meter, picks up the codes that networks and local stations encode their signal. And the 44 markets where we offer the portable people meter for audio, we've now used it to augment in 44 markets the out-of-home, in and out of home. So for the first time, we're able not only to know what's going on in the home viewing, but also out of the home. So I think it's really exciting that we've changed so much. And then, as I mentioned, we retired the diary, and now in 137 of those former diary markets, we're using set-top box data. So we're using big set-top box data, big sample size scale, directly from those local markets like Montgomery. We're using set-top box data for those local markets from our providers like Dish, DirecTV, Legacy Charter, so that was some Spectrum markets, and now Comcast. And then we've also installed over 7,700 code readers in those markets to represent the homes that are over the air and who are, if we don't have the major cable provider, like a Mediacom, Black Hills Energy, Frontier, Cablevision, Cox. So it's really important to us at Nielsen to make sure that we're representative of every type of household, over-the-air households. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the changes coming up. So the next thing that's so important, which is why it's important for us for Nielsen to be agnostic to device and platform, is because when you look at this slide, this is looking at share of daily time spent by platform. And here our platforms are, app or web on a tablet, iPad, Surface, an app or web on a smartphone, internet on computers, TV connected devices like a Google, Chromecast, and Apple TV. And then we have radio here as well, and live and time shifted television. So here, year over year, no big surprise. We know more content was consumed in 2020. The blue part's going to either be the same or higher. But I think it's really important to see that years ago, we would have looked at these different devices as competitors to television. But as I mentioned, anything you can get linear, you can get digitally. And that's why it's important for Nielsen to be able to measure all of these different devices. And that's why we continue to evolve to make sure that depending on where you're watching, because we're all at home right now, and we help, we were talking about before you guys came in about having to Zoom from home. I've got 4 teenagers. And so everybody's trying to find their space, but everybody needs access to content because God forbid there should even be 5 minutes where you're not accessing content. So I think it's really important for us to understand that if you're watching linear content on a digital platform, right, through a tablet or a smartphone, you're waiting in line, you're at the drive-thru, you're waiting for the kids out of practice, or, anywhere you are where you've got some time, you've got Wi-Fi, you can watch content. We want to make sure that Nielsen's there as well and that we can measure that because people are not tethered to their living room or bedroom anymore, right? We're not tethered to the set-top box. Through apps, we're able to go anywhere and everywhere and consume content. So talking about that, this is part of the digital transformation that we've had to as a company and as an industry to go through. And so when you think about where you watch TV, I mean, I'm aging myself. We only could watch in the family room or in mom and dad's bedroom, right? But today, whether it's, like I said, kids on a smartphone, you're on a tablet, you're watching on a computer, a video game console to access things, these connected devices, the reality is we're watching on several viewing devices. And so that's why Nielsen introduced both now in national, but first in local, the ability to take from non-Nielsen homes, so it's not part of our panel, from non-Nielsen homes, people viewing through encoded apps are able to get credit for those local stations. So people in Alabama, in Georgia, in Tennessee, in Mississippi, all of these places, you're able, for non-Nielsen homes, we're going to credit, if you're watching on your app through your Spectrum app, or rather, sorry, like your Fubo or Hulu Live app, those impressions are going to go towards your local station. So what do I mean? I'm talking about, let's say you're watching through what was DirecTV Now, which is now AT&T Now, and you're watching your local stations, and you're having to wait, an hour at the doctor's office or anything, and you want to watch the local news, or you want to watch, anything live at that time. As long as you've got Wi-Fi, DirecTV Now, Nielsen's in the app. So we have something called the software development kit that we're in the app, and every day we get a download from these digital apps and sites that then tells us how to credit that viewing with the same content, same commercials to the local station. That also goes for CBS All Access. If you're watching CBS All Access, your local CBS affiliate, and it's the same content as the linear, so we're not talking about special access shows like, Discovery, or at the time, The Good Wife, or whatever's on there, The Good Fight. This is strictly, it has to be same as what was on the linear. That's being credited back. And so as you can see with this whole evolution, what we're trying to do at Nielsen is to follow the video. We're trying to follow the content, because consumers are choosing, it's no longer about, Thursday night appointment television, right? You, the consumer, are now in charge of when you're going to watch things, how you're going to watch it, on what device. And that's why Nielsen has had to move to this electronic measurement, at least on the television side, to make sure that we can capture as much of the viewing as possible. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over. Oh, I'm sorry. One last thing, a little too early there. The next thing for Nielsen is to include, for those streaming households, is the broadband only household. So we talked about streaming. So traditionally, Nielsen households that we've gotten since the beginning of Nielsen measurement have been homes that either had an over-the-air antenna. So years ago, it would have been rabbit ears. Today, it's a digital antenna, or a cable or satellite home. In 2013, we added to the national sample, we added broadband only. So that's a home that receives video exclusively through a broadband internet connection. What do I mean? So basically, these are homes that only have Wi-Fi, only have content through their Wi-Fi broadband. So if the internet goes out, they have no content, right? If I'm in a cable or satellite home and the internet goes out, I can still watch through a cable or satellite box. If I'm in an over-the-air home and the internet goes out, I still have an over-the-air antenna. But in a broadband-only home, all those streamers across the country, they only watch through that Wi-Fi connection. They have not been part of the local sample. And we started including them in the 137 RPD plus markets, or former DARI markets, started that in January. And we're going to start with the meter markets in October. Why is this so important? Well, here, let's look at, when we look at Montgomery, what is the viewing? Almost 25% of every single newscast in this market is through a broadband or over-the-air household, right? You've got satellite households, you've got telcos, which is like AT&T Uverse or Verizon Bios, and you've got cable. But a quarter are either broadband only or over the air. So that's really important that we include all these types of households in our sample. In Atlanta, where we've had, when we do the annual universe estimates, the size of our television households was over 400,000, but it's misleading because over 500,000 new households were added when we brought in broadband only, because we lost cable and over-the-air households. Because the one thing that did happen in COVID, we had double-digit losses of paid television because people were streaming more. And now I know I'm going to pass it over to Tony. Thank you so much.
Excellent, Claudine. All right, so stop sharing and then I can start sharing. All right, cool. And this will be coming up in just a second here. So I'll give you an overview of what's been going on with the radio landscape during COVID. It was a big shock when things were on lockdown. Radio is an out-of-home medium, and when people are not allowed to leave their home, there's going to be a decline in listenership. But much of that has come back now that people are, adapting to live with the virus. But all throughout this process, we've been doing a consumer study that is kind of ancillary to our rating service. And we just fielded our most recent one just a couple weeks ago. And I thought you'd like to see what the results were of how people are adapting to the changes from the pandemic. So what we've done all along is tried to understand how people's feelings were around the restrictions from COVID. And we asked them a series of questions. This is a survey we've done from about 1,000 people randomly selected across the country, markets large and small, people young and old. But we asked them, what are you seeing in your community? Are stores starting to reopen? Are people starting to do more normal things? Do you feel safe? Are you more or less concerned about the virus? And we've been tracking those scores all along. And going from April of last year, when things were really dire, to now in March of just last month, where people are really starting to kind of come around, you can really see these numbers starting to climb across the board. That's just across all 1,000 people that we surveyed. But we put them into 3 buckets. The first time we did this survey in April, we looked at those scores and we kind of put them into thirds. And the most pessimistic group we were calling the wait and see group. The middle group is the kind of the proceed with caution group in yellow. And then the most optimistic group we were calling the ready to go group. And that's what they looked like back in April. And as of a month later, when people started to kind of understand the virus a little bit more, we saw a lot more people becoming a lot more comfortable with those same responses and shifting more into the cautious or ready to go group. And as we go throughout the year, we've seen those numbers steadily increase as of just last month, where now 2/3 of the people we survey kind of fall into that same like ready to go group. They're just a lot more optimistic about the restrictions that they've gone through. So this ready to go group tends to skew a little bit more 25-54, if you will, not as much 55 plus. They're more likely to have kids, more likely to be high income. Their mean time in a vehicle yesterday was almost 2 hours. So they are spending about 2 hours out of the home on a daily basis. So they have a pretty good opinion of what's going on in their community, and they're more likely to work outside the home. So when we look at those same questions that we had, that kind of group of questions about people's sentiment toward the virus, you see those same scores there represented across the whole total. This is that same ready to go group that I just mentioned. And as you can see, their scores are much higher across all of these questions because they're just a lot more optimistic. They're not as restricted as the whole group. So when we talk about how a community is responding to the virus, we know it's worse in some cities and not so bad in some rural areas, but you can almost start to kind of bucket people depending on their tolerance toward the virus, and we've kind of bucketed them in this group. So this ready to go group is the most optimistic, like I said. But the other thing that we see here is that the ready to go group are also more likely to be radio listeners. Like I said, radio is an out of home medium, and this is a group that's out of the home, and therefore they're a little bit more likely to be listening to radio during the day, more so than the wait and see and the proceed with caution groups. And when we look at the activities that people have done in the past week, we asked them, what activities have you done? You can see them all listed here among all the people in our survey: visiting restaurants, going to see family and friends, hitting the salon, and so on. The heavy radio listener is actually more likely to do almost every one of these categories. They have a lot in common with that ready to go group. So just looking at just from the consumer behavior that we're seeing, the radio listener is kind of the ones that are leading people out of the restrictions, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be out spending in the local economies first. The other thing that is key are major purchases. And we ask people, do you intend to make a purchase within the next year, whether it be an automobile or a home? And you can see the scores on the left are across all respondents. The scores on the right are those who are the heavy radio listeners. And the heavy radio listeners, 18% more likely to purchase a new or used vehicle in the next year, and 64% more likely to buy a new house. So again, not only are they making smaller purchases in the community frequently, they're also going to be making big purchases too. So with that in mind, I've got a couple other different dimensions that we'll look at with regard to these different groups. And we'll look at employment. So one thing to keep in mind with employment is we ask people to kind of define their employment status in the survey, going back to April all the way through March. And among those employed, 2/3 now work outside the home, that's up nearly 70% since April. So that means that there were people who said that they continue to work outside the home. They've stopped going into the workplace when COVID started, but they've recently started to go back in. Were some that were furloughed and laid off, but they've since gone back to work. There's really been a major upheaval with regard to employment through the last 12 months. But you can see a steady rise upward with people going into work. So there's a lot of jobs out there, even back in April, that people did not have the luxury of doing from home. Many of us probably had that luxury. But if you're like an ambulance driver, you cannot work from home. So there were still some that really were required or essential to be at work. But there's a lot of other people who were in that middle zone where they could go in, they could not, and we're starting to see that kind of pick back up. Here's the converse of what you just saw. This is the number of people who were working at home that describe their working condition as someone who stopped going into the workplace when COVID started and do not plan to go back in the future, or those who don't plan to go back in soon. You can see that number is continuing to decline. So there still are some people who will continue to either work a couple days a week from home or whatever, but there are still some that have started working from home that will keep doing it. But really, we can see the trend is now shifting back to more closer to what we saw pre-COVID. With regard to transportation, we see that there's still a lot of apprehension with regard to public transportation. All groups use less public transportation due to COVID, whether they're the wait and see, the proceed with caution, or the ready to go groups. The majority of them are remaining the same. A large portion there, anywhere from 26 to 34%, have decreased their use of public transportation. So there is still some kind of fear with regard to social distancing in public transportation that hasn't yet gone away. What we do see is an increase in those who are spending an hour or more in their vehicles, and it's gone up 150% since April. You see more people spending more time in their vehicles. So that is really why you probably have sat in traffic recently, or you're seeing more cars out on the road, because there are people now out spending more time in their vehicles. And what are they listening to in their vehicles? Most likely radio. What we also see here is that heavy radio listeners are also on the rise with regard to the amount of them that are spending an hour or more a day in their car. So again, there's that connection with radio and being out of home and in the car, and we see that climbing back to pre-COVID levels. The next dimension we'll look at is schooling. And if any of you have kids, I'm sure you've been pulling your hair out this year with the changes that have been taking place. So we're looking at two different time periods here, October of last year and now March. So 6 months difference. You've got groups here in either homeschooled or in any combination of going all virtual, all in person, or in the middle, some mix of both. And what you can see in the last 6 months is a decline in virtual only and a rise in in-person classrooms. So that shows us that we're getting a little bit closer back to normal. So what does that have? What impact does that have on transportation? Well, we're seeing that we're asking people, how do you get your kids to and from school? And back in October, it was pretty even with regard to the school bus or driving to school. And now in March, we see a lot more kids being driven to school. Partly that's because more kids are not it's not that they've stopped taking the bus and now they're getting a ride. It's that more kids are shifting from those hybrid or only being at home. Now they're also being driven to school. And what's on during the school commute? The radio. 9 in 10 say that the radio is on during the drive to school. So a lot of these factors are what's driving radio's return to those pre-COVID listening levels. I think many of you are probably wondering what's going on with shopping and how has shopping changed during the pandemic. So again, we're looking at what people did before the pandemic and what they're doing now. And the first three categories that you see on the left there are either ordering it and having it delivered locally or picking it up locally. This is like curbside pickup at your local grocery store. Then on the right side, you have the traditional in-store shopping and the Amazon style order it and have it shipped. We do see a decline in-store shopping that took place during COVID and a rise in shipped merchandise that was ordered online, and along with all of the things that people are doing locally about curbside pickup and order and pick up in store. So those things did happen. We're going to pivot over and ask people in the future, how do they think they're going to be shopping in the next 12 months? What are they going to be doing more, the less, or same of? So I'm just looking at the things that they're going to do less of and more of that are represented here in blue and purple. Again, on the left side, order and pick up in store, order locally and pick up and have it delivered. A lot of those things, people did try it, but I don't know if it's going to stick around because there's a lot more people are saying they're going to do that less. What we do see a big rise in are people ordering online and then having it shipped to them via Amazon, as well as the return of in-store shopping. Like it or hate it, people are still comfortable with in-store shopping. And once we get through these restrictions, you can see the pent-up demand of people wanting to do more in-store shopping. It may be less convenient, but there's still a need for it. So don't shut down the malls just yet. And finally, the last thing I'll leave you with is the economic outlook. We just asked people what their opinion was on the economy from just a respondent basis. And we asked them, do you think it's going to either get worse, improve, or remain unchanged? Clearly, you can see that the majority of them, 53%, feel that the economy is going to improve over the next 6 months. And as you would expect, the more cautious group, the wait and see group, 39% of them think that the economy will improve in the next 6 months, which is still a majority in that group. The cautious group in the middle, 50% of them think the economy is going to improve. And the ready to go group, 57% of them feel that the economy is going to improve over the next 6 months. So I think the trends that we're seeing are just going to continue throughout this year. So with that, I am going to open it up to Q&A. I don't think we've had any that have come in so far, but if you have questions, Claudine and I are available to take them. You are welcome to type them in. And I think that's the only way you can ask them, right, Lee?
Yes. Or I can bring someone's video up if they would like to ask it in person.
By the way, our emails are on here, so if you have questions you want to ask us privately, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to share the slides too.
And of course, we'll have this session recorded and shared out after the conference. So all that information was really cool and insightful. This may be a dumb question, but is Sirius XM in that radio, in those radio numbers?
We were not keeping Sirius XM as part of it. We were focused on AM FM.
AM, okay. I was just curious. I'm a Sirius customer, so I was just wondering. Well, I'm not seeing any questions come in.
Well, no problem. You know, like Tony said, if you guys let it ruminate in your head, any questions you have, we gave you a lot of information in 45 minutes. And there's a lot of information out there, just questions, whether it's about audio, streaming, television, just what things are happening. We're more than happy to share and follow up with anyone. And we really, once again, want to thank the AAF for letting us come, and so happy. And you know, we're always available. We've done this, both Tony and I, for individual AAFs across the country. We're always happy, especially if you're looking for speakers. You know, tell us, there's so much at Nielsen. Let us know what you're interested in, and we can definitely talk about it.
Yes, thank you. So that wraps up this session. If you guys participating, our next session will be starting at 3:15. That will actually take place at the lobby tables. So when we exit out of the session, you're kicked back to the room. You'll see a bunch of tables in a grid, and we have the 3 round tables labeled as, let's see, we have a succession planning table, a board chair structure table, and a passing the torch table. And we will spend 10 minutes in each one of those. So just pick one table, and then when 10 minutes is up, you can choose another table to hop in and talk. We will have a moderator for each one of those tables. Andrea Wiley, Regional Director, will be moderating the succession planning table. Adrian Van Kirk, our Secretary Treasurer, will be moderating the board chair structure table. And myself, your governor, will be moderating the passing the torch table. And of course, we'll take notes. And so you guys just kind of help us come up with all these great ideas, and we will share these documents after the conference. So I will end this session and see you guys shortly for our roundtables. Thank you for joining us.